B'siyata d'shmai, we're going to learn Yuma Daf Chof Gimel. We're going to start 17 lines from the top of the Amud. Says the Gemara, and this takes us back to the Mishnah. We saw in the Mishnah Daf Chof Beis Amud Aleph that if there would be a number of Kohanim that were racing to the top of the ramp in order to merit being the winner and to be able to do the Trumas HaMizbeach, the Trumas HaDeshen, then if more than one Kohen would arrive to the top, then they would do the Payas, which is the type of a lot. And the way it would work is that the Kohanim would stand in a circle, and each Kohen would, the one who's appointed would say, put out your fingers, and then Umahin Moitziin, says the Mishnah, what fingers, how many fingers would they put up? Achas oishtaim, one or two, Vein Moitziin agudol b'mikdash, and they would not ever lift up the thumb in the Beis HaMikdash, etc. Says the Gemara, Umahin Moitziin achas oishtaim v'chulu. Asks the Gemara, Hashta Shtayim Moitziin, if they were allowed to put two fingers up, Achas Miboya, it goes without saying that you can put just one finger up when counting. And why does the Mishnah say that you can put up Kama Umayin Moitziin, Achas Oishtayim, one or two? Just say you can put two, and we'll take it for granted that if you choose to put one up, that's okay. Answers the Gemara, Rav Chizda lo ikashya. The truth is, it's not that you can choose to put up one or you can choose to put up two. No. Kan bebori, a healthy Kohen who's able to stick up just one finger without a second finger being put up at the same time, he's only allowed to put up one finger. Kan b'choyle, however, a weak, a sick Kohen who's not able to put up just one finger, we allow him to put up two fingers. V'atanya, and proof to this is the Brisa. Achas Moitziin, that it's a Tosefta, that they would put up one finger. Shtayim ein Moitziin, and you're not allowed to put up the two fingers. B'medvar mamurim, when is that true that you're not allowed to put up a second finger? Bebori, with a healthy Kohen. Aval b'choyle, if he's sick and weak, afilu Shtayim Moitziin, he's even allowed to put up two fingers. V'hayechidim, and according to Rashi, Yechidim are those sick Kohanim that are sitting on the side, and they're not sitting together with other Kohanim when they're being counted. They're either lying or sitting on their own. Moitziin Shtayim, they also can put up two fingers. V'ein moinin lohem, and irrespective of who it is, when they put up two fingers, we only count it elo achas, we count it as one. So whilst we're counting the Kohanim, it goes, every Kohen is one number, irrespective of whether he puts up one finger or two fingers. V'ein moinin lo elo echot. Asks the Gemara, is that true that if in the event that he's a Kohen who's allowed to put up two fingers, that you count the two fingers as one? Well, Tanya, this seems to contradict what we learnt in another Brisa. It says in the Brisa, Ein Moitziin, a healthy person is not allowed to put up Loi Sholish, not the middle finger together with his index finger, V'loi Gudel, and not the thumb together with his index finger. Why? Mipnei haramoim, because those that were cheating, and they would put up, if there would be a lot of Kohanim, and they would be quite cramped together, and the Kohen would realize that he would be the winning number, but he's just one out. That means he's the one before the last. He may just add that second finger, and the Kohen who's counting will mistaken it as being two different people, and he'll be the winner. And really it's a cheat, because he's put up two fingers. And therefore, you're not allowed to put up together with, a healthy person is not allowed to put up together with the index finger, not the middle finger and not the thumb. But if he does put up the middle finger, we count it. What would it seem? It would seem that we count it as two. We count it one number for the index finger, one number for the middle finger. Gudel ein moinin loy, but if he puts up the thumb, ein moinim loy, then we do not count it. Not only that, the one who's appointed to take care of this pious, if he sees a Kohen putting up the thumb, then this Kohen is actually going to get lashes bepakia with the whip for putting up a thumb. He's not allowed to. Says the Gemara, so when it says in the Brisa that if the Kohen put up the middle finger together with the index finger, we do count it, the Gemara answers that my moinim loy. No, don't say as we thought that when the Kohen puts up the middle finger, we count it as two together with the index finger that they count as two, and that would be contrary to what we said before in the first brisa, that ein moinin lohen elo achas. No, when it says that moinin, it means my moinin loy nami achas. It means that if he puts up two fingers, even though he's put up two fingers, we count it, but just as one. My pekia, and when it says that a kohen who puts up the thumb, he gets the mamuna, the one who's appointed, gives him lashes with a pekia. What's the pekia? Omar Rav says pekia is marda. Asks the Gemara, my marda. What's marda? Omar of Papa, metarko detaya. It's the whip of the Arab merchants, and they would whip their horses, deposit kreshe. Then the end of the whip wouldn't be straight, it would be, the tip of the whip would be split in order that the horse should feel it in more than one place, and that is the type of whip that this kohen who put up the thumb would get lashed with. Omar Abaye, Miresh Hava Amina. At first I thought, Hodit Nam, this that it says in the Mishnah, in Maseches Shkolim, Ben Bivoi, the person called Ben Bivoi, he was Mamuna, he was appointed in charge al ha-pekia. What does the Mishnah mean that he was in charge of the pekia? So at first, Amina, I said he was in charge of the psilta, of making the wicks, keditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, that mibaloi michnesei kohanim, from the worn out trousers of the kohanim, umehem yeneim, and from their belts that they were no longer wearing, mehen hoyu mafkiin, they would tear strips and they would turn them into wicks. Ubehen hoyu madlikim, and they would kindle the menorahs, the lamps for the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva with these wicks made of these worn out Bigdei Kohuna. So I thought, says Abaya, that when it says in the Mishnah that Ben Bivoi was appointed on the Pekia, that he would make these wicks. Pekia means to tear strips of these clothes. Given the Shaman Elohad Tanya, now that we saw in our brisa that the brisa says V'loi oid, that this kohen, he puts out his thumb, that not only does he not get counted, Elo Shaloike, he gets lashed Min HaMamuna b'Pekia, and Pekia there doesn't mean wicks. Amina, so then I said, my Pekia Nagda, that when it says in that Mishnah that Ben Bivoi, he was appointed and in charge of the Pekia, what does it mean? I changed my mind, says Abaya. It doesn't mean he was in charge of making the wicks, it means he was the one who would give the lashes. Continues the Gemara, there was an incident where the two kohanim would race to the top of the Mizbeach to see who would get there first. They would run and go up the ramp, and then the Mishnah continues to tell us what happened there. That one of them pushed his friend, he fell, and he broke his leg, and the Chachamim saw it was dangerous, so they stopped the races. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, there was another incident of two kohanim, they were both running parallel to each other, neither was winning. They were running up the ramp. And then one of them got to that point of the 4 Amma line just before the Mizbeach, before his friend. Not Al-Sakin, his friend, the one who lost, took out a knife, and stabbed him in his heart. Omar Reb Tzodik. At that point, Reb Tzodik stood al Mailois ha'ulam, on the steps of the ulam, which are these rooms or chambers that were in the Harabais. V'omar, and he said, Achenu b'nei Yisrael, our brothers Klal Yisrael, Shimu, hear me. Harei hu'omer, does the pasuk not say, Ki yimotze cholol ba'adamo, when you find a murdered person on the ground, v'yotzu zekinecho v'shevtecho, and your elders and your leaders, the judges have to go out, they have to take responsibility, they don't know who murdered him, and they have to bring the Eglo Arufa, they kill this calf in the valley, it's a whole procedure. And we see how seriously the Torah takes it when somebody gets killed. Onu, and us, that unfortunately this person's been killed here in the Beis HaMikdash. Al mi lahavi Eglo Arufa, who's responsible for bringing the Eglo Arufa? Al Ha'ir, is it the elders of the city of Yerushalayim, or since it happened in the Beis HaMikdash, Al Ha'azoros, it's incumbent upon the Kohanim who are in charge of the Beis HaMikdash, they have to bring the Eglo Arufa. And obviously there's lots of questions here, the Gemara is going to address them soon. But this is what Reb Tzadok was telling the people, "Go kolom b'bchia," and all the people started wailing and crying. Because look what happened, the tragedy. Somebody was murdered here in the Beis Hamikdash. The father of this youngster, this youngster who had just been stabbed, and he saw that he was still moving. He hadn't yet expired completely, he was still alive. Omar, he said, Harehu kaparaschem, his death is going to be an atonement for you. Adayin b'ni mefarper, but my son, he's still alive. V'lo nitmo sakin, and the knife that stabbed him is not yet Tomei because he's still alive. And take out the knife, so the knife shouldn't become Tomei in the Beis Hamikdash. Lelamdoch, what does this teach us? Shekosha aleim, that they taharas kalim, that they took more seriously, they gave more attention to the halachas of the purity of the kalim. Yosem of shvichas domim, it seemed to bother him more that the knife shouldn't become tomei than the fact that his son had just been murdered. V'cheinu oimer, and the Brisa continues, and that's indeed, the Pasuk says that the concept of bloodshed had become lax and become lenient in their eyes, as it says in the Pasuk, V'gam dam noki, and also innocent blood, shofach Menashe harbe ma'oid, Menashe, the wicked king, had spilt very much innocent blood, Ada shemiles Yerushalayim, until the blood filled Yerushalayim, mipeh lofeh, from one side to the other with blood. They'd become accustomed to murder and to bloodshed, and therefore it was less serious for them, the bloodshed, than the halachas of the purity of the kalim. Asks the Gemara, now that we've seen in the Brisa there was an incident of a murder on the race up the ramp. In our Mishnah we saw that there wasn't an incident of murder, it was just that a Kohen got pushed and he broke his leg. The question is, Hai Maise Kodem, which of these two incidents was first? Ilem with the Shvichas Domim, was it this second incident that was actually happened first, the murder? Hashta Shvichas Domim lo tiknu paisa, if that incident in its own right was not enough to make a pious, Anishbar Raglo tiknu, then why in the second incident, the one recorded in our Mishnah, where the person just broke his leg, why there did the Chachamim suddenly say, okay, this is getting too dangerous, we'll make a pious? There was a murder earlier on at a previous occasion, and that wasn't enough to say that it's too dangerous? Elo, the Nishbro Ragle Kodim. Let's assume that the first incident was the one in the Mishnah. If so, given the Tkinu Paisa, we saw in our Mishnah that already at that first incident when the Kohen broke his leg, the Chachamim said, we're going to do pious. Then this second incident, they were running to see who was going to get the first, and one person got there in the 4 Amos before the other, and then he got killed. Well, what were they running up the ramp for if after the first incident the Chachamim already said there's no more races, there's only a pious? It must be, says the Gemara, the Shvichas Domim Kodim. It must be that this story with the murder was first. Umikorosov, at first they thought, Akroi ba'almahu, it's just by chance, it's like, it doesn't make sense, it's a very unusual occurrence that somebody should stab his friend. Given the Chozi, Afilu Memela, Osilidei Sakona, once they realized that even without being a murderer, then just running up the ramp could be a danger of one Kohen pushing another, and it could get dangerous, to Kin Rabban and Paisa, the Chachamim said, that's it. So murder, that we don't need to assume that will happen again. But if people are going to break their legs, that's it, it's getting dangerous, no more races. What was next in the Brisa? Omad Reb Tzadok al Mailis Ulam. Reb Tzadok stood on the steps of that Ulam, which is some building that was put up in the Azara, in the Harabais, sorry, not in the Azara. V'omar, and he said, Achenu, our brothers Bnei Yisrael, Shimur, here, Harei Oimer ki motzi cholol ba'adama. Does the Pasuk not say that when you find a murdered person on the floor, on the ground, Anan al milahovi, who needs to bring the Egla Rufa? Al Ha'ir, the city of Yerushalayim, Oyalo Azoris, or the Kohanim who are in charge of the Azoris, of the Beis HaMikdash. Asks the Gemara, Yerushalayim bas Yisuya Egla Rufa hui? When Reb Tzadok seems to be discussing and contemplating who needs to bring the Egla Rufa, the Kohanim or the elders of Yerushalayim. Well, do the elders of Yerushalayim ever have to bring an Egla Rufa? Well, Tanya, did we not learn in the Braisa, Asara Dvarim Ne'emru b'Yerushalayim, 10 things were said about Yerushalayim, v'zu achas mehen, and this is one of them, that Eino Mevia Egla Rufa, because in the parasha of Egla Rufa it says that only when the murdered person is found on an inherited part of Eretz Yisrael, you do the Egla Rufa. But this opinion holds that Yerushalayim was not inherited. Yerushalayim lo nischal kol shvatim. We've learnt about that previously, and therefore there is no Egla Rufa in Yerushalayim. V'oidon, another question: why are you discussing Egla Rufa? Egla Rufa was only the Chachamim only have to bring the Egla Rufa, the elders, only if you find somebody murdered and you don't know who murdered him. The pasuk says, "Ki motze cholol ba'adamo, asher Hashem Elokecha noisin lechol rishta, noifil basade, lo noida mi hekiu, mi hikahu." You don't know who killed him. V'ha noida mi hikahu. In this incident here, we know exactly who murdered him. Where does Egla Rufa come in? Says the Gemara, you're right. Of course, nobody thought that there was any Egla Rufa here. Elo kadei leharbois b'pchia. He just wanted to arouse the people and increase their wailing and crying for the unfortunate incident that had taken place. Therefore, he was speaking about how important it is for every life that gets lost. Continues the Braisa. Ba Aviv shel Tinoik, the father of that child, that youngster, came. And he saw that his son was still writhing, was still alive. Omar, he said, Harehu kaparaschem, first of all, he'll be an atonement for all of you. Vadayin b'ni kaim, he's still alive, etc. And he said that the knife is not yet toher, as we saw before. Lelamdoch, to teach us shekosh aleim taras kelim yesem mishvichas domim, that they took the halachas of the kelim even more seriously and more stringently than bloodshed. Asks the Gemara Boilu, what was the issue? Was it that shvichas domim hu dezal? Was it that bloodshed had become lenient and cheap in their eyes? Aval taras kelim kedekayim mekayma, and the stringency and the way that they viewed the halachas of the purity of the kelim, that hadn't changed. Just bloodshed had become cheap. Or Dilmo, maybe no. Shvichas domim kedekayim mekayma. Bloodshed was as serious to them as it always was. Aval taras kelim hu dechamira. It's just that the halachas of the purity of the kelim had become even more stringent in their eyes. Answers the Gemara Tashema, Midaka Nosev Lu Talmuda. Since the Braisa continued with the pasuk about Menashe, that V'gam Dam Noki Shofach Menashe Harbe Moed, Ada Shemiles Yerushalayim Pelope, from the fact that pasuk is brought, Shema Mino, we can deduce from there, Shvichas Domim Hu Dezal, that the bloodshed had become cheapened in their eyes, V'taras Kelim Kedekayim Mekayma. The halachas of the purity of the kelim, that didn't change. Just bloodshed had become cheap in their eyes. Continues the Gemara Tanu Rabbanon. We saw in the Mishnah, we're discussing the Trumas Hadeshen, that they would, the Kohanim would either have a race, or they would make a pious, who is going to deserve to be Torah Mizbeach, to take that shovel full of ashes and put it on the Mizrach side of the Mizbeach every morning. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, it says in the pasuk that after doing the Trumas Hadeshen, separating just a little bit of the Deshen and putting it next to the Mizbeach, there was another mitzvah. They would remove the Deshen from the Mizbeach, the ashes, they would remove them and take them outside the city. But before doing so, the Kohen would change his clothes. He would wear one set of clothes for doing the Trumas Hadeshen, and another set of clothes for doing Hoitzoas Hadeshen, for removing the ashes from Yerushalayim. What does it say in the pasuk? Upashat es begodov, he would remove his first clothes. Velovash begodim acherim, and he would wear other clothes. V'hoitzias Hadeshen el mechutz lamachane, and they would remove the rest of the ashes to outside the camps, el mokim toyer, to a pure place. Says the Gemara, Ufoshat, it says in the pasuk that he would take off his clothes, Velovash begodim acherim, and he would put on a new set of clothes, V'hoitzias Hadeshen, etc. Shem Eini, I would have understood that changing clothes, where do we find a change of clothes in the Beis HaMikdash? Kederech Yom Kippurim. On Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur we know the Kohen Gadol changed from one type of clothes to another type of clothes, from the set of 4 clothes to a set of 8 clothes, depending what part of the Avodah he was doing. When he was doing the Korban Tomid, or the regular Avodas Hayom, he would wear the 8 garments. When he was doing the part of the Avodah that was unique to Yom Kippur, he would wear just 4 garments. So it was different sets of clothes. So to here, if the Kohen wore one set of clothes for doing the Trumas Hadeshen and another set of clothes for Hoitzaas Hadeshen, he obviously wore a different set of clothes. Now regular Kohen only has one set of clothes, so it must be Shepoishet Bigdei Kodesh. He took off the 4 clothes of the Kohen Hedyot, the regular Bigdei Kohuna, and what clothes did he put on instead? V'lovash Bigdei Choil. He just put on his regular weekday clothes, not Bigdei Kohuna, and he just put on his regular clothes to take out the ashes from Yerushalayim. Talmud Loimar. It says in the Pasuk, Ufoshat es begodov. That means I would have thought that that's what it means. V'lovash begodim acherim. The Pasuk says no. Ufoshat es begodov, v'lovash begodim acherim. In the same Pasuk it says he took off these clothes and he wore other clothes, that we compare the two. The fact they're both written right there next to each other, we make a hekesh. Makish begodim shaloivish lebegodim shepoishet. We compare the new set of clothes to the old set of clothes. Ma lahalon bigdei kodesh, in the same way as the first set of clothes, they were bigdei kodesh, they were his bigdei kohuna. Afkan bigdei kodesh. So too, he would take off the bigdei kohuna and he would wear other bigdei kohuna. Imkein ma Talmud Loima, achirim pchusim mehem. What's the pasuk coming to tell me? Take off bigdei kohuna and put on bigdei kohuna. Just leave them on. No. Because when taking the ashes out, the garments could become soiled, it was inappropriate to wear regular bigdei kohuna for that. They would take off the clean and expensive bigdei kohuna and they would wear the inferior set of bigdei kohuna, those that were worn out, those were not so glossy, the cheaper bigdei kohuna, and they would use those for removing the deshen. That was one opinion. Rebbe Eliezer argues with the Tanna Kamma, at least to this detail, what to do with acherim, when the Pasuk says that they would wear begodim acherim, and the Tanna Kamma say acherim means inferior clothes. Rebbe Eliezer just says that the word acherim is not coming to teach us that the clothes that he wears to take out the ashes are inferior to those that he used to separate the ashes, the Trumas Hadeshen. What acherim tell us, that it's actually saying acherim v'hoitzi, which means that you put the comma, so to speak, before the word acherim. Ufoshat es begodim v'lovash begodim. And acherim means different koyanim v'hoitzi es hadeshen. That means koyanim that normally cannot do the avodah, they can still do the hoitzoas hadeshen, they can take out the deshen. Which koyanim would those be? Those would be Baalei Mumin. Limed al koyanim Baalei Mumin, shekshirim lehoitzias hadeshen, that koyanim Baalei Mumin, according to Rebbe Eliezer, are allowed to take the ashes out of Yerushalayim, out of the city. And we've just read this brisa as is, without going into all the details, as Tosfos here discusses, and there's many other details here in the Rishonim, but that's what the Gemara says in a basic reading. Omar Mar, acherim, going back to the Tanna Kamma now. The Tanna Kamma say that the word acherim tells us that the clothes used for taking out the ashes are inferior to those that are used to separate that first shovelful of ashes and put next to the mizbeach. Achirim pchusin mehem. Could the Tana Deber Bishmuel, the reason would be, as the Tana Deber Bishmuel say, the Tana Deber Bishmuel, begodim shabishel behem kadero l'rabbi, lo yimzoig behem kois l'rabbi. If somebody is cooking for his master and his clothes are typically soiled, he would not use those same clothes whilst he's pouring the wine or pouring a drink for his master, because when you're coming before your master, you come with respectable clothes. So to here, the clothes that are used to take out the ashes are typically clothes that would get soiled, and therefore the clothes that are used for doing the Trumas Hadeshen, as with any other avodah, have to be the superior clothes. Continues the Gemara. Omar Resh Lakish. And now we're going to have a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish. Now, what did we see so far in the brisa? The brisa was talking about hoitzoas hadeshen, taking the remaining ashes from the top of the mizbeach out of the city. And we saw there, Tanna Kamma say, begodim acherim, you have to wear the 4 clothes, and they are just inferior clothes. Rebbe Eliezer says, acherim tells us that even Baalei Mumin can do the hoitzoas hadeshen. And now we're going to have a machlokes. What's with the actual Trumas Hadeshen? According to the Tanna Kamma, who say that even Hoitzoas Hadeshen, they don't say that Kohanim Baalei Mumin can do it. The Tanna Kamma hold that Hoitzoas Hadeshen is called an Avodah. And obviously it goes without saying that the Trumas Hadeshen is called an Avodah, and Kohanim Baalei Mumin cannot do that. The question is, according to Eliezer, who says that Hoitzoas Hadeshen can be done even with Baalei Mumin, the question is, with the Trumas Hadeshen, can that be done with Baalei Mumin or not? So that's a machlokes. Omer Reish Lakish k'machlokas b'hitzah kach machlokas b'haroma. Reish Lakish says that just in the same way as according to Eliezer, Hoitzoas Hadeshen can be done with Kohanim Baalei Mumin, you learn it from Acherim. Says Reish Lakish, the same applies to the Trumas Hadeshen, that Kohanim, Acherim, even Baalei Mumin can do the Trumas Hadeshen. Rabbi Yochanan argues with Reish Lakish and says, Machlokas b'hitzah. The Machlokas Tanna Kamma and Rabbi Eliezer is only by Hoitzoas Hadeshen. Aval b'haroma, but the Trumas Hadeshen, Divrei Hakol Avodahi, everybody says it's an Avodah, and if it's an Avodah, a Baalei Mumin cannot do the Trumas Hadeshen, even according to Eliezer. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. My Talmud Reish Lakish. What would be the reason, the source for Reish Lakish, who says that even Trumas Hadeshen is not considered an Avodah, and even Baalei Mumin can do the Avodah? Omar Lacha. Reish Lakish will tell you, Ishal Kadaita Chavodahi, if you'll say that Trumas Hadeshen is an Avodah, and therefore Kohanim Baalei Mumin are not allowed to do the Trumas Hadeshen, and this is all according to Eliezer. Yesh lecha avodah sheksheira b'shnei kelim? Is it possible that one can do something called an avodah, namely the Trumas Hadeshen, with only wearing two of the garments? Because if you look in the Chumash actually only speaks about two of the garments. It says midoivad u'michnesevad. The midoivad, the ksoines, the tunic that the Kohen would wear when doing the Trumas Hadeshen, and the Michnasayim, the trousers, they would wear when doing the Trumas Hadeshen. The Mitznefes, the hat, is not mentioned, nor is the Avneit, the belt, is not mentioned. So for the very fact that the Torah says you do Trumas Hadeshen with just two of the four clothes, it must be that it's not called an Avodah. And it must be that even Kohanim Baalei Mumin can do the Trumas Hadeshen. And the Rishonim discuss, according to Reish Lakish, how do we understand the Tanna Kamma? The Tanna Kamma also agree that there's only two begodim mentioned in the pasuk, and nonetheless they say that a Kohen Baal Mum is not allowed to do the Avodah, not allowed to do the Trumas Hadeshen. And it would seem, and Rabbeinu Hananel says explicitly, that according to Tanna Kamma, the Trumas Hadeshen is considered an Avodah. So we should really be asking, how can you do Avodah with just two clothes? So that's a question that the Rishonim discuss. But the Gemara is now asking, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that even according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that Hoitzoas Hadeshen can be done by a Baal Mum, he says that Trumas Hadeshen is considered an Avodah and cannot be done with a Baal Mum. How's he going to respond to what Reish Lakish says, that the pasuk just says midoivad or michnesevad, only two begodim? There's no Avodah with just two begodim. Answers the Gemara, Goli Rachmana b'ksoines u'michnesaim, that the pasuk mentioned midoivad u'michnesevad just to impress on us. Don't think that this is weekday clothes. Don't think that this is not an avodah. It is an avodah, and you need big day kuna, and you'll understand on your own. It will be self-understood that it's not coming to exclude the other two clothes. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, indeed, for the Trumas Hadeshen, even though the pasuk explicitly only mentions midoivad u'michnesevad, we would understand that you need to wear the mitznefes and the avneit, the other two as well. Asks the Gemara, Umayshna Hani. According to Reish Lakish, these two are mentioned because according to Reish Lakish, you only have to wear these two. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that you have to wear all four, then just don't say any of them. And the very fact that the Torah says that a Kohen has to do the Trumas Hadeshen, will understand that it's an Avodah and it needs all four clothes. Why did the Torah single out the tunic, the midoivad, the ksoines, and the michnosaim? Answers the Gemara, because there's another limud that we have from these two. When it says midoi bad, what we learn from here is that midoi kamidosai, that this tunic has to be measured exactly according to the size of the kohen. Not too long, it mustn't be dragging along the floor, nor is it allowed to be elevated off the floor, it mustn't be too high, it has to fit exactly. That's what you learn from the midoi vad. The Michnasei vad, what do we learn? Look at the Tanya. Minayin shelo yehi dava koidem lemichnasayim. How do you know that the first of the four clothes that the kohen has to wear has to be the Michnasayim? Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, u'michnasei vad yilbash al basarei, that he has to wear the Michnasei vad, which is these trousers, al basarei. It has to be the first thing that it goes onto his flesh. There's nothing else on his flesh, no other big dekuna on his body before the Michnasayim. So these two halachas we learn according to Rabbi Yochanan. The fact that these two are mentioned is to teach us these halachas. Over Rish Lakish, midoi kamidosei. How does Rish Lakish learn that this tunic, this ksoines, has to be exactly the size of the kohen? Mida'afki rachmona beloshen midoi. Why doesn't it use the word ksoines like it does in other places? The fact that the Torah calls it midoi bad is in order to impress on us this extra halacha that it has to be exactly the right size. Shelo yehi dava koidem lemichnasayim. How does Rish Lakish learn, according to Rish Lakish, that Michnasayim and the midoi vad are mentioned to tell us that just these two need to be worn? So how are you going to learn that the first clothes of the four clothes that have to be put on are the Michnasayim? Says the Gemara, Rish Lakish will say, Me'al basari nafka. The Michnasei vad has to be mentioned to tell us he has to wear the Michnasayim. Why does it have to say the word al basari again? Why does it have to say it at all? It should just say V'lovash hakoyin midoi vad, uv Michnasei vad. Why does it have to say Yilbash al basari? Al basari, to tell us this extra halacha that it has to be the first clothes that he puts on his body. Continues the Gemara, Neimuka Tanoi. We just saw Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, whether according to Rabbi Eliezer, Trumas Hadeshen is considered an avodah or not. According to Rabbi Rish Lakish, it's not considered an avodah, and therefore even Kohanim Baalei Mumin can do the Trumas Hadeshen. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it is considered an avodah, and Kohanim Baalei Mumin cannot do the Trumas Hadeshen. So the Gemara is asking, Neimuka Tanoi, are we saying that this is the same as a Machlokes Tanoim between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Doisa? Why? Because the pasuk says al basari, it says v'lovash hakohen midoi bad u'michnasei vad yilbash al basari. It would have been enough to say v'lovash hakohen, the kohen should wear midoi vad u'michnasei vad al basari. Why do I need again the word yilbash? You just said v'lovash. So the Brayso addresses that al basari ma talmud loima yilbash. Why did it say again the word yilbash? Lahavi mitznefes v'avneit leharoma, in order to impress on us that Trumas Hadeshen you have to have yilbash, another two clothes. Which are the two clothes? The mitznefes and the avneit. You need all four clothes. If you divri Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and we assume if you need all four clothes, it's because it's an avodah. Like Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said that even though the pasuk explicitly mentions only the midoi vad or Michnasei vad, but we understand it's the other two clothes as well. It must be that way because it's an avodah. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Doisa Oimer. Rav Doisa argues and says that the extra word Yilbash is l'rabbi spigdei kohen gadol b'yom Kippurim, a completely different halacha, that the clothes, the four clothes worn by the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur, shaksherim lekohen hedyot, that a kohen hedyot is allowed after Yom Kippur. The kohen hedyot is allowed to wear them. Omar Rebbe commented on this that shtei tshuvos b'davar. And we've learned this extensively on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, that Rebbe argued with Reb Doisa and had two reservations against him. Number one, Choda, the Avnei Shel Kohen Gadol, the belt of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur was made of boots. Lo yizeu Avnei Shel Kohen Hedyot. It's not the type of belt the Kohen Hedyot wears all year, including Yom Kippur, which is made with kilayim. Another question that Rebbe has against Reb Doisa, that begodim shenishtamish behem kedusha chamura, these four clothes that the Kohen Gadol wore in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, is Tishamish Bem Kedusha Kala is going to be used for the rest of the year by regular Kohen in the Beis Hamikdash. That's also doesn't make sense. Elomat Talmud Loima Yilbash. Rebbe's now got to say, if he doesn't agree with what Reb Doisa does with the word Yilbash, to say Yilbash means that you're allowed to wear those clothes that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur. So what is Yilbash teaching us? The Rabbi says Ashchokim to say that Bigdei Kohuna are kosher even if they are worn out. So that's Rebbe. And now we've got another 4 lines, which the truth is it doesn't belong here. And some take them out. Some take these 4 lines out. And they actually belong to the Sugya on Daf Yud Beis. We'll read them because they're here. Ve'inicham sham. When it says in the Pasuk that after the Kohen Gadol finished his Avodah on Yom Kippur, he would take the clothes, ve'inicham sham, and he would place them there. Melamid shetu'unim gniza. They have to be hidden away there. That's it. They're never going to be used again. Reb Doisa argues and says, Ru'in hein l'kohen hedyot. They can still be used by a kohen hedyot for the rest of the year. So why does it say v'nicham sham, place them there as if that's where they're going to stay? Just in order to impress on us that this Kohen Gadol after Yom Kippur should put them there and leave them there. Don't ever take them out again for Yom Kippur, but not to exclude other Kohanim being able to use it afterwards. My love. Now we're coming back to the machlokes that we saw between Reb Yehuda and Reb Doisa, whether the word Yilbash tells us that you have to wear 4 clothes, that including the Avneit and the Mitznefes, or whether it's telling us another halacha regarding Yom Kippur. That the clothes, that the Bigdei Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur are kosher for a Kohen Hedyot. So says the Gemara, my love, do we not assume that this is the machlokes? The Mar Sovar Avodahi. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Trumas Hadeshen is considered an Avodah, and since it's considered an Avodah, therefore you need to wear all 4 clothes. That's what he learns from Yilbash, that you also have to wear the Avneit and the Mitznefes. Or Mar Sovar, and Rabbi Doisa argues and says Lav Avodahi. And therefore, it's enough to wear just the 2 clothes that the Pasuk mentions by the Trumas Hadeshen. And what you're going to do with Yilbash, that you do with what Reb Doisa says you do with it. Says the Gemara Loi. It doesn't necessarily mean that this machlokes Tanoim, Reb Yehuda and Reb Doisa, is the machlokes Reb Yochanan and Resh Lakish. The Kule Alma Avodah here could be that both Tanoim agree that Trumas Hadeshen is considered an Avodah. And you have to wear all 4 clothes. Everybody agrees with that. This is the machlokes. Mar Sovar Tzricha Kral Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda says that the pasuk says explicitly Midoivad u Michlesevad, and 2 of the clothes are absent, are not mentioned in the pasuk. He says, I need the pasuk Yilbash to tell me an extra word to tell us you have to wear all 4 clothes. Or Mar Sovar Reb Doisa says, no, I also think you have to wear all 4 clothes, even though the pasuk says just 2. Lo Tzricha Kral Reb Yehuda. I take it for granted from the very fact that the Torah tells us you have to wear 2 of the clothes, so I know it's an avodah, and if it's avodah, I take it for granted you need to wear all 4 of the clothes. So what do I do with Yilbash? Yilbash, Rav Doisa says, he learns the halacha of l'Rabbis Bigdei Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim sheksherim l'Kohen Hedyot. And therefore there's no reason to believe that the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Doisa is the identical machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish. And in Mirat Hashem in the next year we're going to continue from here.